So in preparation for this episode, I randomly texted a few friends. This question was out of the blue. They didn't know it was coming. I just texted it to them to see what would happen. And who I specifically texted mattered because these friends are different ages, very different jobs, different cities, and they'll all have a different relationship to the question being asked. Each friend I knew would have a vastly different perspective based on vastly different areas of work and life and personalities and worldviews. And the question was in regards to performing. And I didn't define performing before I asked. I wanted to see what they would bring to it without much prompting. I tried to give them as little prompting as possible. People would ask questions and I would answer them simply and vaguely on purpose. And the question was this: do you think you're performing in any area of your life, whether it be professionally, personally, or creatively? And here's what came back. So there's a photographer that I know from Texas. She shoots mainly events. This is how she makes most of her money. She's really good at it. Her clients love her. However, we all know that photographing events is the kind of work that pays the bills but doesn't, necessarily feed the soul. She came back with this, quote, "I have to pretend I'm having a good time when a lot of the time I'm bored and just want to go home. I try my best to get good images, but mostly I just want the money." And then she said the thing that I think is important here. "When I'm not performing, my brain moves faster. The creativity flows and I feel more like myself." Another friend who had been performing her whole life, ballet on stage, music, being the good daughter, playing piano for her parents' friends when they came over, being the trophy kid. Who can relate to that? She told me she performs down to, get this, what shoes that she decides to put on. That she's always thinking about which version of herself to bring into whatever specific room that she's in. And then she said this: "Only I know that my real reason is to belong." She also told me something that I think is important here and worth noting. She said that she performs so well that when she tells people that she struggles with things like imposter syndrome, with self-doubt, with just getting herself to do the basic job, they actually don't believe her. That her coworkers are shocked. The people who've known her the longest can't square the accomplished person that they see with the person on the inside who wakes up wondering if today is the day that she's going to get found out. "I think it's just an act," she says. "I think I'm good at putting on the mask." She's been doing it for so long, she can't tell anymore. And then a pastor friend of mine from Iowa sent me a voice note in response to the same question. He preaches every Sunday to a small-ish church congregation. He's fully aware of being watched, aware of the cultural expectations that come with the job of a church leader. But he said something different from everyone else. He said this, quote, "I don't feel fake. I don't feel like I'm trying to play a specific role." But he does say that he makes different jokes with his friends than what he makes from the pulpit. He knows the difference between the rooms, and to him, both versions are him. Neither is a mask. But not one person I texted, though, said they don't perform. Not one. The pastor was the only one who said that he doesn't feel fake. And I've been thinking about that ever since. Well, my name is Patrick Fuller, and this is The Terrible Creative, where we have honest conversations about creativity, identity, and finding your voice. This is episode 60, friends. I almost said 50. We're in the 60s now. So, bust out your bell bottoms, smoke your joints. This episode will be fun. I'm calling it The Unknown. So, this is the last episode of the Johari Window series that we've been going through. And we've been in the arena, the blind spot, and the facade. And today we are shifting into the fourth quadrant, the one that really nobody talks about. If this is your first episode, welcome. Feel free to jump around. These are in no particular order, really. My email is always open, and my link is in the show notes. All right, you groovy cats, let's get into it. So for those of you who are new, go back and listen to the glass house, the tell, the facade first. They'll make this land a little bit better, a little bit easier. But just in case you won't, I probably wouldn't either. Here's the short version. The Johari window is a model with 4 coordinates. Basically, to sort of boil it down, it's what you know about yourself that others know too. This is called the arena, or what I like to call the front porch. What others can see that you can't, it's called the blind spot. What you know but keep hidden, this is the facade. And then what neither you nor anyone else has seen yet, and this is today, this is the unknown. So 2 researchers built this model in the 1950s, a guy named Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingram. Of course, his name is Harrington. It's still such a cool name. And the original model for the unknown was framed as a limitation, territory that nobody had access to, the blind leading the blind, if you will. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it, especially for us. But, who am I to question a guy named Harrington? But for me, here's the distinction. As someone who does both commercial photography and personal work, photography and podcasts and everything else, commercial work has an objective, The image either meets the brief, it meets expectations, or it doesn't. And my clients aren't paying me for my inner life, right? They're paying generally for the result. And that's fine. That's the job. But how I show up to the job affects everything around the image. Whether the talent feels safe enough to be present, whether there's enough trust in the room for something real to happen. The performance doesn't damage the image directly. It damages the conditions that make the best image possible. But personal work is different, right? Whether it be the podcast, the book, or a personal photography project, it's the thing that you make when nobody's paying you to make a specific version of it. And in personal work, you really are the material, The work and the person behind it are supposed to be the same thing. The gap is supposed to be small. And the unknown, the version of yourself that neither you nor anyone else has fully seen yet. And that's not just where the interesting work lives. that's where this kind of work comes from. Which is why the question that I asked my friends this week matters. Because if you're performing in your personal work, if the managed version is the one making the thing when you don't have to make the thing, then what's actually in the work isn't you, it's something else. It's the mask. And before I get too far into this, I want to go back to the pastor from Iowa for a second. Because after I recorded the opening of this episode, after I said that he was the only one who told me that he doesn't feel fake, he actually sent me a follow-up message. He said that he was at a friend's house having a Long Island iced tea. And he said something that really changed how I heard his first answer. He said he works every day to keep Pastor Kyle, his name is Kyle, and the real Kyle as close to reality as he can. He said that his wife helps. I've met his wife. She's really nice. She's really cool. She calls him on it when she sees something drifting. That the hardest part of his job is all the non-reciprocal relationships. He cares about the people that he pastors, that he leads, and they can't fully care back the same way. The power dynamic of his position won't allow it. And then he said this is interesting. He said, that's why so many pastors blow up their lives. The gap between the public persona and the private person grows until it becomes something that they can't live up to. Until the distance between those two versions of people is so wide that something has to give. And when it gives, it usually blows up to a substantial level. But Kyle mentioned that he enjoys a drink. He won't talk about it on Sunday mornings because several people in his congregation, he says, are in recovery. And I don't think that's being duplicitous or hypocritical or whatever. I know Kyle. I know that he has integrity, but it is the daily management of that gap. It's small, it's concrete, and it's consistent. And Kyle here wasn't describing integration. He was, I think it was more maintenance, And I think that's actually more honest than what I thought he was saying the first time. He's not the person who has it all figured out. He's the person who works every day not to lose the thread. Same as the rest of us, just with a congregation watching. And here's the irony that I just keep sitting with, the thing that I probably shouldn't say out loud, but here we go. I perform in the context of this podcast, a medium where I could really edit my way into being whoever I want. And I don't think you would ever know the difference. And somehow I end up more myself here than someone standing in a building specifically founded on the idea that humans should embrace their full humanity. The original vision that Kyle is trying to live inside was radical because it was essentially a direct attack on the stage actor version of humanity. In the Sermon on the Mount, Christ wasn't just giving a moral lecture. He was offering an exit from the theater, He was saying, stop managing how you're received. Stop the PR campaign for your own spirit. Show up as the full, complicated, unpolished thing that you actually are. It was an invitation to be known in the unknown. But we're human, And that kind of exposure is terrifying. So we took this wild, unscripted invitation to be seen, and we built this massive institution around it. And almost without realizing it, we gave it a dress code and a script to follow. We turned the one place where you're supposed to be real into the one place where the mask has to be the most convincing. But I digress. So I recently hired a stylist for a photo shoot. I had never actually met her in person. We chatted a few times on Instagram. I stumbled across her work and loved it. But honestly, what got me was how she just presented herself to the world. Her vibe, you know, the way that she wasn't afraid to speak up about the things that she cared about, even when it probably cost her something, maybe cost her jobs. And I love people like that, people who stand for something, people who let you see who they actually are in a public way. I've been wanting to hire her for a while, tried to pull together a personal project that ended up being way too expensive. So when this particular job came along, it was just right for her. I didn't have any hesitations about hiring her. And when she showed up on set, I saw a slightly different version of this person. Please hear me. Not worse, not less skilled, just a more like a polished version, you know, more professional. Like she was being careful about what she was saying and how she was acting. And please hear me, the work, outstanding. But this person that I had been following, the one with the opinions and the vibe and the willingness to cost herself something for what she believed, that wasn't quite there. What I got was this like professional version, you know, a more managed one. The version the transaction required. And I will be honest, I found myself a little sad about it, you know, which is funny because she did exactly what you do when someone pays you. I was her client, after all. And when you have a client, you give them the version that earned that particular rate. And she did. She earned the rate plus more. But you bring the competence and the execution and you leave the rest in the car, I think, you know? And at the risk of sounding a bit hypocritical here, I definitely do the same thing. Every client I've ever had received the version of the professional Patrick. But who I hired on that particular day, who I thought I was hiring, was the person that I was watching, you know? The full version, the one that stands for something. And please hear me, that's not her fault. I just think that that's what money does to the room. But I kept thinking about it because I wonder how many people have hired me for the same reason, because they follow the podcast or read the book or found something I said that maybe made them feel seen. And then when I showed up on set or for a meeting, they got a professional version of me, you know, the more managed one. The one that left the more complicated and human parts in the car. I guess what I keep thinking about is that gap, you know, between the version of yourself that shows up in your most intimate spaces, you know, at home with the people who actually know you, care about you, and you care about them. And then the version that shows up for the work. And beyond that, what would it even look like to collapse that gap, to show up as the full version of yourself in the professional spaces. You know, would I get fired? Maybe, probably not. Maybe, I don't know. But the fact that the question even occurs to me tells you something about where the performance is coming from. What set of cultural and professional expectations created it? What I decided either consciously or unconsciously, somewhere along the way, had to stay in the car. And there are spaces where I can be more myself, you know? This podcast is one of them, actually. But what if that Patrick showed up on set? What Kyle said is really interesting to me because you show up as you in different spaces, but it's more a protected version of you, a more guarded version of you. And the room determines how much of yourself you bring in that particular moment, in that particular space. I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what motivations and fears and insecurities and desires are running below the surface in the background. The ones that shape the performance without me being aware they're doing it. And sometimes I'm afraid of what it would mean to fully show up as myself in any space, personally, professionally, creatively, because maybe I won't like what I find, you know? To kind of illustrate this, there's the serial killer problem, right? I don't want to be too extreme about it, but it illustrates the spectrum that we find ourselves in, you know? The upstanding citizen by day who nobody would ever think would hurt a fly. Then the serial killer at night who transforms into someone else, or maybe their true self? I don't know. That's the extreme version of something that we all carry. It's the gap between the public persona and what's underneath it. Or alternatively, something less dark. The business executive who runs a multi-million-dollar company and decompresses by playing Pokemon Go in the park. He hides that version because his C-suite friends won't understand. Is that a performance or is that just discretion? And that's the question that I can't fully answer. What's the actual benefit of full authenticity? If professionally, relationally, culturally, it's better for people to maintain a certain performance, then what are we actually asking for when we talk about people showing up as yourself? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And I think that may be the most honest thing that I can say at the end of 4 episodes about the Johari Window. Here's what my event photographer friend from Texas said. The one who's bored at events but wants the money. The one whose brain moves faster and more efficiently when she's not performing. She said this. Creatively, I don't have to perform on test shoots or portrait shoots when they basically say, we trust you. We trust you. 3 words, 3 words that really change everything. When someone says, we trust you and means it, that's really key here. They have to mean it and you have to understand and believe that they mean it. When that grade goes away for you, when the assessment stops, when nobody is deciding if you're good enough for the room, something in you opens up, right? Your brain moves faster, the creativity flows, and you feel more safe. You feel like more yourself. That's the unknown becoming accessible. And it's not through some mystical process, right? It's not through years of intense therapy or shadow work or sitting with a guru on a mountain. It's just through the removal of the condition that requires the performance in the first place. I think trust removes the audience. And when the audience disappears, the performed self has nothing to perform for. And what's left? The thing underneath the arena, the thing underneath the blind spot and the facade. This is the unknown. That's what the pastor from Iowa has in my friend who has to think about the shoes that she wears, the shoes that have to match the mask of that particular room that she's walking into, is still looking for. The pastor knows where to find it, you know? He knows which rooms require the performance and which ones don't. And in the ones that don't, he's not thinking about the shoes he's going to wear or his jokes that he's going to tell or his beverage of choice. He can just be fully Kyle. Most of us, I think, are still learning which rooms are which. The pastor included. For him, though, there's more on the line for him. It has to be more clear. He has to be strategic about which version of himself shows up and when. So here's what I just sort of keep returning back to as I'm thinking about this episode this week. I'm thinking about my friend and her carefully selected shoes. I'm thinking about my friend Kyle, the pastor, and his Long Island iced teas and jokes. The stylist on set, my own I don't know. I think every one of those responses is essentially about the same thing. The gap between the version that shows up and the version that's actually there. The managed self versus the unmanaged one. The performed versus the real. And what I found, not through any sort of grand plan, but through just trudging through 60 episodes and showing up and saying something that I think is true, is that the unknown self and the unknown work are the same thing. When the managed version steps aside, what comes through is both more you and more surprising than anything you could have planned. It's not always better, but it's always more honest. And honest is where you and I have to start. You know, this podcast started out as a podcast for photographers. And if you've followed me from the beginning, you know that. Starting out, it was strictly a photography podcast. It was the arena that I could see. It was clean. It was legible. It fits into a sentence. It was a simple enough concept that even my boomer mother could understand it. But what I couldn't have predicted, though, what lived entirely in the unknown, was that it would connect with people who have never picked up a camera. Designers, writers, musicians, teachers, therapists, CEOs, people who have emailed me just to tell me that something has connected with them. People who found it not because they were looking for a photography podcast or photography advice, but because they were just looking for something that made them feel, I don't know, less crazy maybe. I didn't plan that. I could not have planned that. And even if I had set out to make the thing that it is today, I don't think it would have become the thing that it is today. It was living completely in the unknown, The work revealed itself. 60 episodes of walking towards this flickering light that I talked about last week without knowing what it was exactly. And that's maybe the most simple thing that I can say about the unknown. You don't find it by looking for it. You can't do that. You just find it by making something and paying attention to what it becomes. Because when you stop performing for the audience you thought you had, you just say the true thing, And it turns out that the true thing belongs to more people than you planned for. This is not a strategy. It was my strategy from the beginning. I think that's just the unknown doing what the unknown does. Sometimes, not always. But when it works in a way that no managed version ever could. So here's a question I've been thinking about that I've been trying to answer. The one that maybe is the reason why I started this series in the first place. The one underneath all 6 responses that I received this week. Why do we perform? Not the surface answers, right? Which is to fit in, to get the job, to not worry about the parents, to belong in the room. Those are the real reasons for the performance. But underneath all of them, I think is something simpler. We perform because we're not sure if the unperformed version will be received or safe or appropriate for the room. Sometimes that's fear, but sometimes that's wisdom. The Johari window doesn't tell you which one. It just shows you the glass. And so we edit it. We manage it. We put on the right shoes for the right room. But the unknown is the unedited version, the one that we haven't fully shown. Sometimes it's because we haven't trusted it would be received. Sometimes because we haven't fully seen it ourselves yet. And I want to be really careful here because I don't think the unknown is always good. I feel like I've made it seem more positive than it is. The unperformed self isn't automatically the better self. It's just the less managed one. And less managed can mean more alive, or it can mean more destructive. The Johari window doesn't make the call. It's just glass. It's neutral. It's transparent. It just shows you what's there. What you do with what you see, that's on you. And here's what I found while making this podcast. Some of it won't be. Some rooms can't hold the unedited version. Some audiences aren't ready for it. Some clients are paying for my professional mask. And that's what they need. And that's fine because that's what they'll get. But some will. There are rooms where the unperformed self lands exactly right. Where the weird brain finds the people it's been looking for. Where the thing you thought was too inside or too personal or too niche turns out to be the most universal thing that you could have ever made. Those rooms, I promise, exist. And those are the rooms where it doesn't land, where the unmanaged version costs you the relationship or the client or the standing and the reputation that you've built, where being more yourself is also being less careful. And less careful has consequences. The window doesn't sort these rooms for you. It just shows you more of yourself so you can make a more honest decision about which version to bring. That's all it does, my friends. That's all it was ever designed to do. So I've been thinking about where a lot of what I write about and speak about comes from. And I had this thought this past week while I was walking my dog, Loki, that I think maybe, perhaps, I make most of this through this like strange desire to speak to a past version of myself. Because at so many points in my life, I could have used a voice in my ear to read words on a page that made me feel less alone, less crazy. Because for creatives like me, the ones who had to figure out their own paths and their own way of doing things, that path brings with it an incredible amount of intellectual and emotional loneliness. Feeling like no one understands you, what you're trying to make or how you think and how you move in the world. That feeling like you're always the odd one in the room, no matter what room that you're in. So, to be honest, I've concluded that this is where that I create all of this from. I write in the direction of that 16-year-old version of myself, the 21-year-old version of myself, the 31-year-old version of me. Times when I felt most alone and most misunderstood. Above teaching about how to make interesting things, I really do. I want to make the crazy ones feel seen, at least for a few minutes. Because I truly believe that that is probably more valuable than any piece of gear advice or business advice that I or anyone else could give you. It doesn't matter if you're a photographer trying to make it in a competitive market or a graphic designer feeling trapped in a corporate job in some city you didn't plan on living in, or just an executive assistant who at one point dreamed of writing screenplays but found themselves just needing to get a job to survive. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I see you. I see you. The unknown isn't a destination. It's not something you arrive at after therapy or enough episodes or enough years of shadow work or shoe awareness in trying to figure out which version to bring in the room. It's a practice. It's a direction. It's a commitment to making something that couldn't have been planned because it comes from the part of you that the plan doesn't have access to. My friend who performs down to her shoes, she said something in her follow-up that I think is worth highlighting here. She said this: being able to build an authentic, integrated self, I can do sometimes, but it takes a lot of work to be grounded, to be calm, to get in that kind of space of being like, I can bring an authentic me that doesn't have to think she's being graded or assessed. Wow. Sometimes, not always, it takes work. And I don't think this is failure. I think this is the most clear and honest description of the creative process that I've ever heard from somebody who wasn't even trying to describe the creative process. You don't get to live in the unknown permanently. You get to visit. You get to make something while you're there, and then you bring it back. And the more you do that, the more you make things from that space, even briefly, even imperfectly, even when you're not sure the room can hold it, the better you get at finding the thread back. The thread that the pastor works every day not to lose. The thread that your friend who's been performing since ballet class is still looking for. The thread that this podcast has been for me in the weeks when the photography work was quiet and the silence was so loud, I needed something to walk towards. So the series about the Johari Window ends here. 4 episodes, 4 quadrants, 4 different ways of asking the same question. Who are you really when no one's grading you? The arena is the answer you give in public. The blind spot is the answer other people give when you're not listening. The facade is the answer you keep to yourself. And back in episode 57, The Glass House, I said this model falls short, that the arena requires 2 people, that you can't open the door alone and expect to be known. And I still believe that. But I think Harrington was right about the window itself. It's neutral. It's just glass. It shows you the whole self. The parts that you know, the parts that others see, the parts no one else has seen yet. It doesn't tell you which parts are good and which ones are dangerous. It doesn't sort the rooms for you. It doesn't promise that transparency produces connection or safety or popularity. It just shows you what's there. But what you do with what you see, that's on you. That's your job. So, make it for them. Not because it's safe, not because you know how it's going to land, but because the version of you that makes the true thing, whatever it costs, wherever it goes, is the only version that has a chance of making something that is interesting and that matters. So, until next week, my friends, stay curious, stay courageous, and yeah, stay terrible.